Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about the Sig 320 design problem, okay? Now this design problem is specific to the 320, which the military is also using as the M17 and M18. There's been a couple of problems in the past, which supposedly they fixed, and there's some new problems that have come up. So I started doing a little research on this. I made the mistake of just kind of assuming that the Sig 320 was a Glock copycat, okay? Like this P80 here, it's a Glock copycat. It uses the same, well, this one's like a clone, basically. It uses like the same exact internal parts. But there's lots of companies out there that make Glock copycats where they maybe changed the parts a little bit, but it's the same idea. And there's three safety features that are built into the Glock that normally should be in any striker fired gun that are not in the Sig 320. Okay, well, two of them specifically are not in there. Like, they completely removed those two safety features. So we're going to talk about that. So first, let's talk about the Glock striker fired gun. What are the safety features that are built into the gun? Let me get the white one here. This one, it stands out a little bit more so you guys can see it. So the first safety feature is the trigger safety, right? So that you have to put your finger on the trigger. You know, basically you have to push that middle leaf there to deactivate the trigger safety. On some other designs, sometimes they'll have like a knuckle design or a two-piece design. But essentially, if I hold this from the sides here, right, not pressing, you know, on that middle leaf, the trigger cannot move back. Okay, so Sig in their 320 removed the trigger safety. Okay, so several years back, they had the problem where if the SIGs were dropped on their end over here, what would happen is the trigger had enough mass that it would actually move back. So the trigger would move back if it was dropped on its back over here, on the end part, and then the momentum, the inertia of that trigger would move back. They would have never had that problem if they had a trigger safety built in the gun. Now, the way they decided to address this is they put a lighter trigger in there so that it would have less mass. So if it was dropped on its end like this, it wouldn't move back. So to me, that's a fail. Okay, a striker fired gun should have a trigger safety. Okay, so that's the first safety that's kind of built into that a striker fired gun should have, that Sig did not put in their Sig 320. Now, the second safety feature, right, is that when you rack the slide, okay, basically the striker, right, is half cocked, and when I push, you know, that creep or that travel of the trigger, that completes the cocking action. Okay, so your Glocks and most of your Glock clones, when you rack the slide, you are half cocking the gun, so that when you press the trigger, you're completing the cocking action. Okay, you're completing that cocking action. So Sig in their 320 decided that, hey, when you rack the slide, you're going to be fully cocked. Okay, so that striker is all the way back, as if though I had picked up the slack on this Glock. Okay, so what that means is, because the gun is now fully cocked, if that firing pin is released, it has enough energy to go forward and hit the primer with enough power to set it off. Okay, whereas with a gun like this Glock that's like half cocked, if it were to release and hit the primer, it should not have enough energy to set off the primer. Okay, so that's the second safety mechanism that should be part of a striker fired gun that Sig removed. Okay, so first they removed the trigger safety, And the reason is they put this like nice curved trigger, and I'm guessing that they were going for like the competition shooter, ergonomics, you know, comfortable gun. And I'll be the first to say that Sig guns are very comfortable. They got very comfortable grips. They got very comfortable triggers. But that's like the last thing that I'm really concerning myself with. Okay, I mean it's a factor, but it is the last thing on my list of things that's important. So they put in this competition trigger that has the cute little curve. They didn't want to put the leaf in there or knuckle trigger, so they removed that safety feature, and then they made it so that the gun fully cocks, so that you don't have this travel, right, which gives you that crisp competition level break, right? So again, catering to that group of people, right? Or to the, I could remember, especially for the in the military context, they're not doing competition shooting. But you know, the mindset here is that, hey, what works really good in competition should also work really good in a in the combat type of scenario. At least that's what their thinking was. Whether that's true or not is another story, but that's what they're thinking. So they removed those two safety features in favor of comfort and basically having a crisp, short, crisp trigger break. Okay? And the third safety feature, which they kept, but they did a really shitty job with, is the firing pin block. Okay? So on the Glock, right, you've got this firing pin block here, right, where basically when you press the trigger, right, when you press the trigger here, right, you see the shark fin over there? That shark fin comes back, right? Put my finger here so you can see. So that shark, as you press trigger, that shark fin comes back. Okay, right there, you see it? Okay, so as that comes back, what that does is, get behind the camera so it makes it in focus. That shark fin comes back and it pushes on that little guy right there. And as it pushes on that, that allows the firing pin to come forward, right? So if I don't push on it and I push forward on the firing pin lug back here, you can see how it will not come forward. But if I push down on it, it comes forward. So with the Glock design, what they did is the firing pin block is completely separate from the firing pin. On the Sig 320, they kind of incorporated the two into one. Okay, so the firing pin block is part of the firing pin. Okay, so it's a really complicated, not complicated, but it's a more advanced, it's a more complicated design than the Glock design. I mean, Glock is, I mean, you can't say it's not simple. It's got the least number of parts of any handgun, basically. So it's a much simpler design. So what they did is they made the firing pin block part of the firing pin, and this, because there's a spring in here for that firing pin block. It's a coil spring, right, that compresses. The spring on the 320 that I saw is very similar to the spring that you'll find on the slide catch, right? So this is like what I would call like a pretty flimsy spring. It doesn't need to be, you know, the spring that pushes down on that slide catch. You know what? It's a cheap part. I've actually, you know, it did break on my factory Glock 17 somewhere around 75,000 rounds. You know, it's up to about 95,000 rounds, but somewhere around 75,000 rounds, that thin spring did break, and it broke as part of because what happened is the trigger spring broke on that, and as part of me taking the gun apart to fix the trigger spring, when I took out the slide catch, that spring also broke. So so here's the thing: if that spring is not working, all right, your firing pin block is not going to work on your Sig 320. So it's a very thin part. Given that they removed the other two safety mechanisms, right? They removed the trigger safety, and they removed the fact that this has to travel back, right? right? You see how this has to travel, right, in order to fully cock the gun. So given that they removed two of the safety features that are normally found on a striker-fired gun, you would think that they would invest a little bit more into having a firing pin block that was more robust and reliable. Okay, but it seems that they went for for something that was weaker. Okay, definitely looking at the spring, it looks like a weaker spring. Now, this is not to say that on a Glock you can't. It's not possible to have a failure, right? Of any one of these safeties. I've seen, and this is on builds that I have made myself because these are all aftermarket parts. So I've actually received like an eBay trigger where the did not fully engage and work. Okay, so that's one of those things where, like, I can see it, it's not working. Okay, this part's a piece of shit, throw it out or send it back or whatever. So it's not like, again, you can't receive faulty parts, especially aftermarket parts, but I'm sure even with factory parts, you can receive it, but you can see that it's broken, not working, and change it. Okay, so I have seen aftermarket Glock triggers that have a faulty trigger safety, right? So that can happen. I mean, the second safety, which basically where the gun is half cocked. I have one over here. This build over here. This actually has a faulty trigger. But what happens with this one, where like it moves back, right? So it still has to move back to half cocked. But what happens a lot of times if I'm shooting this, I'll have a dead trigger, so it doesn't pop up and engage it. So the type of failure that I've seen with the safeties, with the second type of safety, is where it just doesn't engage and I have a dead trigger, and basically I would have to manually rack the gun in order to shoot it. So you can have a failure, but it's the type of failure where the gun's not going to work, rather than it's just going to, fire the bullet on its own. Okay. So as far as the third safety, right, which is the firing pin block, what I actually did this once by mistake. There's a coil spring in there. When you're installing that coil spring, if you put it in sideways, right, what will happen is it rubs up against the firing pin, okay, and what will happen is your firing pin will get stuck in the forward position. Okay, so what will happen is now the gun's going to slam fire. When you fire that first round, the slide's going to come back, it's going to go forward, and it's going to automatically fire 2 or 3 rounds or dump the whole magazine. Okay, so I've seen that type of a problem with that. Again, that's because of an installation error that I made. Okay, but that's something that, like, when you test fire the gun, you're going to see immediately, right? Because you're not going to carry a gun that you haven't test fired. So when you go to test fire the gun, you're going to see, okay, this thing's, doing multi-round bursts. There's a problem with this, okay? And the problem is usually going to be that either that spring, the firing pin block spring has been put in sideways. The other thing that I have seen is I've actually received an aftermarket firing pin block that was out of spec, and it was a little bit too wide, and that was also rubbing up against the firing pin, and keeping it stuck in the forward position or in the back position, and basically that was just a matter of taking the Dremel and smoothing out the firing pin block. But again, this is a problem where you're going to test fire the gun, and you're going to immediately see that you're having a problem, right? You're having a problem. So there's 3 safeties here that are normally put into a striker-fired gun. And again, Glock was kind of like the inventor of the striker-fired gun, right? I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but as far as the popular, common striker-fired guns, Glock was it. But with Glock, we've got these 3 safety features, and what's happening is, like, there's kind of some redundancy there, right? Where if one fails, you got the other, Well, what Sig did is they removed 2 of them, right? They got rid of the trigger safety, and they got rid of the gun being half cocked when you rack it, so it is fully cocked, so that if it drops, if that firing pin is released, it's got enough energy to set off the round. Okay, so now the Sig 320, at least the military version, put this thing back together. At least the military version does have a thumb safety on it. Okay, so the idea there is, does the Sig 320 thumb safety make up for the fact that there's these other features that are missing? Okay? So my first thought is that with the, so that thumb safety is kind of like a 1911 style thumb safety. Okay, so the first issue is with the 1911. Okay, the thumb safety here is actually blocks the sear. Okay, on the Sig 320, the thumb safety blocks the trigger so that the trigger can't move back, but that doesn't prevent the sear from moving. Okay, whereas on a 1911 design, when I flip this thumb safety up, it doesn't just block the trigger, it also blocks the sear from being able to move. And so the thumb safety on the 320, even though it kind of looks like a 1911, it doesn't work the same way. It's not a sear block, it's just a trigger block. Okay, now you might say, hey, how about an AR-15? What does the safety selector do on that? Okay, it actually just blocks the trigger. It does not block the sear. However, there's a different philosophy of use there, right? Normally, right, like let's say my AR-15 is my primary home defense gun. I don't keep the gun loaded with a round in the chamber. Okay, so that's, you know, normally most people, and as far as I know, even the military, when they store the guns, they store those guns unloaded. Okay, so what's happening is, if something's going on and I go to my I go to get my AR-15, I'm pretty much like, you know, I know that something big is going down here. So I'm, you know, basically there's an increased threat level where I'm willing to accept the additional risk of now having a round in that chamber and the safety on, and knowing that it only blocks the trigger. Now, the parts in an AR-15 are a lot bigger, they're a lot more robust, and the military's done tons of drop testing. You know, I'm sure that there's some cases where the safety failed and the gun went off, but again, I mean, you'd have to abuse the shit out of it. For the most part, the AR-15 has passed enough drop tests that it's considered to be a safe gun with a round in the chamber. Okay, now again, different philosophy of use there. With the AR-15, it's normally not loaded. You don't chamber around until you know you're going to use it, right? Or you think you're going to use it, so there's a higher risk type of situation there. And also, it's a longer gun, so you have a better idea of where the gun's pointed. It's in a sling, either pointing down, or if it's on your back, it's pointed up. Okay, as opposed to, let's say, a gun that's like in the holster here. You know, depending on, you know, when it's in the holster, like if I'm sitting down or if I'm laying down with my feet up, you know, the gun could potentially be pointing in an unsafe direction, right? If you're sitting, I don't know, in front of a TV with your legs up, you know, it's possible that the gun might be pointing in an unsafe direction. So with the handguns, we generally expect a higher level of a safety feature in the gun, because we are typically carrying the gun around every day with a round in the chamber. So we expect more from it as far as it not going bang when it's not supposed to go bang. Okay, so I think a different philosophy of use there, right? Your handgun, especially your everyday carry, is always going to be on you. It's always going to have a round in the chamber. Whereas with the rifle, that primarily stays in the safe unloaded until you're ready to use. So again, going back to the issue of the thumb safety on the 320, it only blocks the trigger. It does not prevent the sear from releasing, right? So it's not a sear block of any kind. So that thumb safety is not really useful. Now, the other thing is, with these thumb safeties, even on 1911s, there's plenty of times I've seen 1911s in people's holsters with the safety off, okay? Because they either forgot to engage it, or they forgot to they forgot to engage it, or they accidentally hit it and it fell off. Most people that carry 1911s usually have a holster that has a strap that will go along the back here that will prevent the hammer from going forward, so that when they go to pull this out of the holster, they have to disengage a strap that rides the back here that basically blocks the hammer. Okay, so even with 1911 thumb safety designs, a lot of 1911 guys, a lot of them at least, don't trust them. Okay, so that's why they used a holster with a safety strap, you know, that goes in front of the hammer. Okay, so yeah, so on the 1911, the back strap safety here, that only disengages the trigger, but the thumb safety, it disengages the sear, or blocks the sear, however you want to put it. The point there being that that thumb safety is more for looks, okay? And the other thing with the 320 safety is it's actually a lot thinner, a lot smaller. So I can imagine a lot of people not using it, just because if your hands are sweaty, you know, they might slip off of it. People that carry Glocks are used to not having a safety because they have come to rely on the other safety features of the gun. So I can see somebody making an error and saying, hey, if the Glock doesn't need the thumb safety, maybe the Sig 320 doesn't need that thumb safety, and they're just going to choose to not engage it just because of their prior experience with the Glock. I can also see that happening. So again, just putting that out there. But the point is that that thumb safety by itself does not block the sear like the thumb safety does on the 1911. Now, on I have here a Sig, what is this? The SP 2022. Okay. So this has a, oh, got a magazine in there. So this is a single action, double action. Okay. So with this style of a gun, right, with this Sig, the safety feature on this gun is that once I put it around the chamber, I decock the gun, and the first round is double action, and then the subsequent rounds are single action. Okay, so there's no external safety on this. The safety mechanism on this is that you decock the gun. So again, I just wanted to go through different safety features. So the safety here is that the hammer is down. Okay, so with the Sig 320, the firing pin is fully cocked. So what I want to do now is I want to go through some safety checks with you guys. And I watched the video earlier today of a guy that had a Sig 320, and what he did is when you rack the slide, he had a lot of play here, right? Now all these guns are going to have a little bit of play. That one seemed like it had a lot of play. So what he did is he pressed the trigger a little bit. Now, and he pressed the trigger a little bit, right? And then he played the slide a little bit like this, and then just by him doing this with the trigger slightly back, right, just with a tiny little, way less pressure than I got on this, the firing pin would release, okay, with just the slightest bit of pressure. And the gun should not do that, okay? So that was a factor, because remember, when you got the frame and you got the slide here, you got the sear on the bottom, right? So the sear basically, you got the firing pin lug, right? So when you rack that slide, the sear comes back and it pulls back your firing pin lug here. So you have this engagement. So if you're rocking the slide back and forth, you know, it should, you know, basically there's a possibility, if the gun isn't designed right, if it isn't put together right, you know, or even if you have like a quality control defect, that as you play with the slide, you know, the two could separate and you could release. So this is one example that I saw, and the guy was able to repeat this, right, with his 320, where he would rack the slide, put a tiny bit of pressure here, play with the slide like this, and then the firing pin would basically release. Okay, so that's definitely something that if you got a Sig 320, you want to test out. Obviously, without around the chamber, you don't need around the chamber to test this out. But I'm doing this with all my guns, because all these guns here that I built, it's like all of a sudden it's like, wow, I never even thought of that possibility. Because one of the things that I was doing when I was building all these guns over here, I would rack the slide, and then I would take a mallet, and I would basically hit the gun, right, to make sure that it doesn't release, right? So now I'm taking this a step forward where I'm fully picking up the slack, okay, on that trigger, and making sure that that doesn't release until I actually pull it, right? So I've done this with, I mean, this is just a small fraction of the P80s that I have built, but I've already tested all of these, including this one over here. This is one that I know has a problem, right? And again, with this one over here, what will happen is sometimes it won't pick up the like if I like, you know, basically the trigger and the firing pin lug, they just got a bad connection. I'd have to change it both out. But even on this one, if I pick up the slack, right, and I'm hitting this with a hammer, or with a mallet rather, it's not releasing. Okay, so this is still a safe gun. So that's one of the things I want to test. And the other test that I want to do, I've already done it with all these guns, but definitely want to do it with your carry gun, is make sure that your safety plunger is working, right? So basically, when you push forward on this, you want to make sure that that firing pin doesn't come through until you actually push this up, right? Now you see how it's coming through. Now, right, you got to push on this. So make sure that safety plunger on a Sig 320, it's somewhere back here. And because again, it's connected to the on the Sig 320, it's connected to the firing pin. On the Glock, it's separate. So you make sure it doesn't come forward until you push it forward, and then when you pull it back, make sure it pops back into position, right? So that it can't go forward again. Okay, so you want to test that out on all your guns, and you know, every time you clean your gun, this is one of those things that you want to test out, right? You want to make sure that that safety plunger is working, especially if you've got a Sig 320, because on your Sig 320, that's the only real safety that you've got, right? That safety pin plunger. And I already talked about how I think that the spring on that safety pin block spring is really kind of crappy. Okay, you got to make sure that the one safety that you have is actually working. Okay, because I don't, for reasons I explained earlier, I don't think you can rely on the thumb safety, because again, it only blocks the trigger, doesn't block the sear, doesn't block the firing pin from moving. Okay, so what are my thoughts on the Sig 320? By the way, I do have a Sig 250. I forgot to bring it out, but I do have a Sig 250, which is a double action only, right? Hammer goes back all the time, and that was the original. Basically, the Sig 320 was based off of this Sig 250. Actually, let me go get the gun real quick. Hold on for a second. Pause, you guys. Okay, guys, so Sig 250. All right, so this is the 250. This is a double action only, right? You can see it's got a hammer there. Every time you fire a gun, it's got a long pull. I really liked this gun when I first tried it. I got this like I think probably about 10 years ago. At the time I got this gun, I didn't fully understand the safety features of the striker fired gun. Okay, I was still fairly new to guns, right? And I did not feel comfortable at the time of carrying a striker fired gun with around the chamber. Okay, it wasn't until I actually started building these things that I started like really understanding the safety mechanism, and understanding how the holster is also part of the safety mechanism, right? That blocks the trigger. So it wasn't until I really started building these that I really started believing in the Glock safety features. So prior to this, right, I really liked the double action, single action guns, and I liked the double action only guns. The reason why I like this 250, as far as double action only guns, it has a very smooth trigger pull, right? Among the smoothest double action only trigger pulls I had ever felt. So I really like the gun, and I love definitely comfortable, right? Very comfortable grip. Again, the 320 has the same grip, so I can definitely understand why people pick up a 320 like, ooh, so comfortable. Yeah, it is comfortable. You know, I mean, again, it's kind of at the bottom of my priority list, But yeah, it's got a very comfortable grip. It's got that the trigger is very comfortable. Yes, it is. Again, not that big of a deal to me, but it is a comfortable trigger, right? That curved trigger. Let's take this apart for a second. So to take this apart, you lock the slide open, flip this down forward. This is an important feature because when you go to put this back together, you gotta do that in reverse. If you don't do this properly, that can also increase the chance of having a problem. But anyway, the thing I want to show you guys is on the 250 here, and the Sig 320 is going to have the same sign. You can see how the firing pin block is way back over here, right? And that's because it's actually part of the firing pin mechanism. Okay, so it's way back there. So again, this is something that you want to test out to make sure on your 320, and the slide part's going to look very similar on your 320, except that it doesn't have the hole here for the hammer to come through. What you want to make sure is that when you push, where's that firing pin lug? Oh, it's actually got a firing pin here. Hold on, I gotta get something to push the firing pin. I need a tool. I thought it would be, hold on, let me go get a tool. Okay, so I got a little tool here. So yeah, it doesn't have a firing pin lug because it has a hammer that needs to hit the firing pin in the back here. If you have a 320, it's gonna have a lug like the Glock before that hangs down. So what I'm gonna do with this, right, is basically I'm gonna push on the firing pin over here, and I want to make sure it doesn't come through, okay, unless I'm actually pushing that down, and now I push on it, right, and now you can see how it comes through, right, and if I let go, it pulls back again. It doesn't come through unless I push on the firing pin block. Okay, so you want to test that firing pin block to make sure it's actually working. Okay. Now, something worth noting on, and I'm sure it's the case too on the, or it might be the case on 320, I'm not sure. When you rack the slide, dry fire this and open this up, and then look at that safety. A lot of times it is hanging forward, right? Right, like right here. You see how it's hanging forward? That's fine, right? Because that's fine because I just dry fired it. Okay, but if you pull this back and then push it forward, it's not going to go forward. So I just want to point that out because a lot of times people will ask me about that. When they take the gun apart and they look at it, they're like, "Hey, my firing pin is hanging forward. Is that supposed to do that?" Yeah, it's supposed to do that because you just dry fired the gun. Let's put this back together. Okay, so, and let's get this back together. So the 250, the Sig 250. I really like the gun. I like the design. The reason why I don't use it that much is because I find that if you shoot 200 or 300 rounds, that double action trigger pull, it gets really tiring. And then after like 100 rounds, you start missing, your proficiency starts dropping just because your trigger finger starts getting a little bit tired. Okay, so that's the reason why I don't use the 250 double action only. The Glock guns are really the best guns. Okay, they're the cheapest. I think they're still overpriced. I mean, the Palmetto sells their dagger, which is a Glock Gen 3 clone, for about $200, and I think that that's what Glock should be selling them for. And I'm pretty sure that if Glock ever sells guns to the military on contract, they're probably going to sell them to the military for about $150. Okay. So yes, definitely the Glocks are like they're the cheapest, best guns you can get. They could still be cheaper, okay. But anyway, one of the things I want to show you guys with your 320, when you're putting it back together, right? What you want to do is bring this back together, use your slide catch here, right, and then engage this, because I've seen people, or I've heard in videos where a lot of times people will come back, they don't engage the slide lock, and then they try to lock the gun from here, and from what I heard, that can cause engagement problems with the sears. Okay, so that's what you gotta do. You lock the gun open, use the slide lock, and then use the locking mechanism. Okay, so that's one of the things that kind of stood out, because like I said, I've been doing lots of research on this. Kind kind of wanted to give you guys like a summary video of all the stuff I've been able to collect. I do not have a Sig 320. I've shot it many times. The reason why I never got a Sig 320 is because I just got so many of these Glock style guns that it's like, and I built these back in 2021. I was gonna ban the P80s, so I just started cranking these out month after month after month because I'm like, God, you know, those bastards, they're not gonna stop me. So I basically built so many that when the 320 came along, right, when the Army took the 320, it's like, you know what? First of all, they wanted something like $700 for it, and I'm like, that's a really expensive gun. And I shot it, and I'm like, you know what? I don't really think it's that any better than my Glocks, right, or my Glock clones. So that's the reason why I never bought a Sig 320. Wrong one. That one goes. That one goes here. That's the reason why I never bought a Sig 320. At the time, I wasn't aware of the design flaws that I mentioned in this video with the 320. I just assumed that it was a Glock copycat, but it's not. It's not a Glock copycat because they removed 2 of the vital safety features, right? Well, the first one is pretty simple, right? They could actually add that back in with the trigger safety, right? That they could probably modify the gun pretty easily. But the fact that when you rack the slide, you are fully cocked, that they can't change easily. They would have to redesign the gun. Okay. Also with the thumb safety, it not being a sear block or a firing pin block, again, they can't easily change that. They would have to redesign the gun altogether. So there's no easy, simple fix for them other than to redesign the gun. So the reason why I never bought the Sig 320 is because I didn't think it was any different. I didn't think it was cheap enough or different enough from all these Glock clones that I already had. Okay. And now I'm definitely not going to buy it because I now have researched and I fully understand the design flaws with this, and I definitely don't recommend you guys get it. Now, from what I understand, those design flaws only apply to the 320. From what I've heard, it does not apply to the 365, to the P365, which I've shot a bunch of times. I really like the gun. It's one of those guns that I would have bought, and I'm kind of like planning to buy. The only reason why I haven't bought it yet is because I just got so many of these Glock 43s that I built. It's like, okay, I've got all these safes, and I'm still running out of room to put all these guns in. This is like a tiny fraction of the guns that I have on this table. So again, that's like they would have to, like Sig would have to start selling guns for like $200 each for me to look at it and say, yeah, you know what? It's not any different from these guns, but you know what? It's cheap enough that I'll buy it anyway. Okay, so that's kind of where I am at with guns. Same thing with like AR-15s and rifles. Just like, you know, AR-15s are just like almost perfect guns, like almost, not but almost. So somebody would have to build or redesign a rifle that's both better and cheaper, right? Cheaper than $500 for me to like really get into any other platform other than the AR-15. Right? So that's where I'm at with the Sig 320. Like I wasn't interested in buying it just because of its price. I didn't think it was really any different than other Glock style guns. But now with the design problems, I'm definitely not buying it. Okay, so drop some comments. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you all soon.